Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Testing Peers podcast. Thank you for sticking with us. This week I am joined by David.
Hello.
And Simon.
Hello.
My name's Chris, and we're sending our great love to Russell and Dembe, his dog, who are not here this evening. Tonight we're going to be talking about dealing with disappointment, and I think it's a topic we've probably all got something that we can relate to. But before we get stuck in, I wanted to give a quick shout out to our patrons. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/testingpeers, and with that, some lovely patrons have signed up to support us who have heard what we've done and want to support us as we go forward, and we really appreciate them. So we just wanted to say a big thank you to Amy Corcoran, Beth Marshall, Kaylin Moyes and Gordon Crawford. We do have a few different tiers. If you feel like you want to get involved and support us in any way, we will also be doing monthly votes on upcoming topics that we'll be discussing, and we give shout outs to you. So if you like hearing your name on Spotify, this is one way of doing that. We've also now got a sponsor called Saffron QA, and Saffron QA is a provider of recruitment and consultancy services exclusively for the software testing industry, and we will have more details for them on our website and on the show notes. Thank you so much to Ben from the Saffron QA team. We really appreciate the support. So before we go into dealing with disappointment, I thought I would just touch on a very important introductory topic. Have you ever had a childhood memory? Maybe it's like of something you've eaten or something maybe you watched on television, and then you revisit it as a grown-up and you go, oh no, this is really bad or really inappropriate. I'll give you a clue because I'm just going to talk lots and I can see you guys are super excited about this. I watched the YouTube channel that does honest trailers, Screen Junkies. He does like a sort of a parody of a movie trailer, and he'll sort of make a joke about it. And I watched one the other day on Hook, the sort of Peter Pan grown-up movie with Robin Williams in it. As a child, I thought this movie was amazing. I've got these really strong and glorious memories of how great this film is. But looking back on it, it's full of disappointment, desertion. There's like two of the key children from the original Robin Hood series are just not mentioned at all. There's really weird bits by Granny Wendy still fancying Peter Pan and lots of really strange and highly inappropriate things that you probably shouldn't be indulging with as a child. And so he's like, you may be watching this with your kids now, having watched it as a child and have treasured memories and thinking, that's a bit disappointing.
I think there are lots of films that when you, as an adult, you realise actually have adult themes. And one of the biggest ones, I think, is Grease, probably. You know, you watch Grease and you think it's all happy, fun songs. And actually there's an underlying, teenage pregnancy and all that sort of stuff in it. And you don't always appreciate that when you're actually watching it as a kid. So that's always an interesting conversation when you've got kids of your own and they realise that. Also, another thing, eating things. So I remember Pop-Tarts, and I remember really liking them when I was a kid. And then I had one not long ago, and they burn your mouth and they're incredibly sweet.
I had one this week, David.
So that's a major disappointment.
Yeah, I think on the film side, one thing that's it was quite a shock to the system when I realised it was, and it's an obvious one, but Home Alone. Yeah, as a kid,
there's nothing wrong with Home Alone, Simon.
You think that film's amazing, and yet the school, our kids' school, we're running that as the Christmas movie for everyone to go and sit and watch, and we're sat there going, our son's 5 years old. We're not really going to want to go and send him in to watch a kid who lives in his house alone, gets attacked by two crazy men. Yeah, it's just...
But films are slapstick.
They are, but you don't want to encourage that for a 5-year-old, right?
My kids probably would take a paint pot and try and swing it down.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty sure mine would as well.
There's a certain age limit, like Kevin's meant to be 8 in that movie, I think.
Yeah, you're right. There's films. I mean, Hook. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of Hook like that. And I guess there's things like that. You'd have to think about them in the moment. You get lost in the film and you enjoy the films. There's numerous films I've watched now, and even things like the Herbie films. I loved the Herbie films as a kid, and now you look at them and think, wow, they're just weird.
Yeah.
It's not even that they're particularly adult themed or anything else. They're not. The concept's just weird.
Maybe a bit more of like rather than just a childhood thing. Do you remember when we were students, or David, when you were a teacher, I suppose, when Little Britain was a thing, and how funny we all thought that was every week? And now you look back at that, and actually it's really disappointing how many things are really offensive in the way they present them. They've got blackface, they've got sort of homophobia, they've got a lot of other sort of jokes about disability and things, and actually that's disappointing looking back at those things.
Well, there's things like the Fast Show and Harry Enfield and Friends, whatever it was called.
It was Chums. It was
Chums. I thought it was. And then there's things like Bottom as well with Brickman and Adrian Edmondson, which I used, as a teenager, used to love that. But now looking back, you think, oh, okay.
Everything is of its time, whether it's comedy and also special effects. You look back at the films of their time was cutting edge special effects.
Yeah.
So my daughter watched Ghostbusters. When you first watch it in 1980, 84, whatever, it was fantastic. And actually now it's just tame. It's really terrible. You've got to base it on what it was then.
It's true. And I think Tom and Jerry have addressed that with their cartoons. They have a slide that comes up before the cartoon goes, and they say that this was captured at a time when this is how the world was. Please don't look at it through today's eyes. Please look at it through the eyes of those things.
Well, actually, yeah, and you say that because Tom and Jerry is one thing that has become quite prominent in our house now, and there is the old Tom and Jerry on, but then there's also the new Tom and Jerry Tales and Tom and Jerry Stories, which are a lot tamer, where Tom and Jerry seem to get on for most of the episode. It's just not the same, but yeah, they have tamed it down because it's how things are nowadays. And the same with Looney Tunes. The new Looney Tunes is a lot more tame as well. There isn't lots of mindless violence and anvils dropping on heads and stuff. It is what it is.
Never seen an anvil falling from the sky in real life. That's disappointing.
Well, you don't generally take an anvil to the Grand Canyon on a day trip, do you? Really?
Exactly.
If I go to the Grand Canyon at any point in my life, I'm going to flip and try. Well, let's move on to the actual topic at hand.
It's a disappointment that you don't take an anvil to.
Yeah, it's a big disappointment.
So I've always thought that there are a lot of things that testers can take to heart, take personally. We've mentioned in previous episodes about how testers can often be the bringers of bad news and can often be like quite pessimistic people. But actually, I think a lot of us are inherently quite good at identifying risks and bad things, but maybe we generally have quite a positive outlook on life. But there are an awful lot of things that we have to confront day to day that can be disappointing, be it there's an issue I think is really important and it's not going to get fixed, be it there's a conflict with somebody who's maybe more senior or more important. That doesn't happen. Maybe I'm overlooked for something because I'm just a tester. Maybe I'm overlooked for a promotion. Maybe I discover that there's a huge pay gap. It can be any of these things. I just thought it'd be really interesting to discuss not only where we've identified certain disappointments that we have had in the workplace, but also some stories that maybe we have about how that made us feel and maybe how we managed to overcome them.
I think there are disappointments that we have forced on us, as it were, of things that we've done, like exactly like you say, things like having missed a major bug or something's gone out into the field and you feel personally responsible of how could I have missed that? And there are lots of different reasons for that. I can think of an example where on one of the products I was working on, the client that we sent it to had found that there was interference in the radio waves that was actually being produced. And I couldn't recreate that because I didn't have enough hardware in order to actually recreate that. But at the moment when I was told it, initially it was, oh my God, I feel really guilty because I didn't actually find that and I've let the client down. It's all relative, it's exactly what's actually happened. There's the other side of it where, so for example, sometimes my biggest disappointments is when people come to me and go, I've handed my notice in. And you think, oh my God, you are a brilliant person. What could I have done to keep you here? What have I done wrong that's made you actually want to leave? And it's probably enough of those things. It's sort of my own insecurities sometimes, is it that I feel responsible for them having gone. But naturally, there is natural wastage. Naturally, people are going to leave your company at certain stages of their career, be it that retirement or just because they want a new challenge. and we shouldn't take that personally, but there's always that initial thing, especially for the first time that happened. I took it very personally, as to why they wanted to leave the group.
Happened to me in 3 months of starting my old job. Someone left. It was devastating to me. I was like, oh no, I've come in, I've tried these new things. Bye.
I had that as well when I first became manager. I think I talked about it on the previous episode, where I became the manager and I had 2 resignations in the first 3-4 months of me becoming the manager of the team that I'd worked with. And it was, like you say, David, exactly that disappointment of, what did I do wrong? Was it me? And it partly probably was me for at least one of them, because they wanted the same role that I got. It's hard to get over that hurdle. One of the disappointments that's always stuck with me, and it's probably not the obvious one from a testing perspective, but it was actually the reverse of bug getting into production as a disappointment. It was more the fact I identified a major issue in one of my first testing projects when I was testing. And I was disappointed because I knew how much the developers were confident that it was all working. And I was almost disappointed that I'd found a defect because I knew they'd be annoyed. I knew they'd be frustrated because one of the developers was quite a volatile, quite feisty developer, and he used to get quite shouty if things were found. And I got to a point where I didn't like raising defects to him because I knew how he'd react. It was a point where I was like, I don't really want to have to tell him this, but I'm going to have to. And I was trying to work out, did I do something wrong? Have I done put the wrong data in? I spent probably a day agonizing over, no, I'm going to have to tell him this. And I spent the next day sitting with him, and I tried to word it in a way that comforted him as much as possible, that wasn't telling him his code was rubbish. Yeah, it was a difficult conversation. That was a big disappointment to start with, but it's how you deal with that disappointment and how you come out the other side it can turn into a positive sometimes.
If we look back to people leaving us first, how did you deal with that, David?
Best thing to do was talking to people, first of all, because I didn't have the testing peers at that stage. So it's probably my wife that I probably spoke to. She is quite sobering. Not everyone's going to like you for a start. You are in a leadership position. They can't all be your friends. You shouldn't try to be their best buddies. We should expect this of people that are working in the company. So now I'm sort of a bit more used to it. I do sometimes dread people who go, do you have a few minutes just before the end of the day? And I think, oh my God, they're going to say that they want to leave. I sort of mentally prepare for it, that we can't keep everyone forever. So that's how I do it. So I prepare for the worst, and then if it's not the worst, then it's fine.
Yeah, and I think the situation I got into with the person leaving at that point was, the way I got around it was, okay, this is a chance for me to actually build the team that I need, and I can create and mold the team the way I want it, which was the way I spun it. Obviously I was disappointed they were leaving. They were a good person. They were very technical. It was definitely a thing of, I now get the chance to hire someone fresh, bring some fresh blood in, try and get them working the way I need them to work, give me a chance to prove myself as a hiring manager. Yeah, and try to look at the positives. And my wife was the same as yours said, David. She also sort of said to me along the lines of, not everyone's going to like you, not everyone's going to do this. And also she told me off, because I am a people pleaser. I do try to keep everybody happy. And that's a phrase that she uses a lot, is stop trying to please everyone. And it's true. It's something that I had to accept at that point was the right thing. I can't keep everyone happy. I've taken the role. I wanted the role. Therefore, they couldn't have it. They've chosen to leave because of that. It's just the way of the world.
The recruiting part is an exciting part, but for me, that wasn't even something I considered, because I was already recruiting in my circumstance. And so this was kind of one of the people that was the most established, that knew the product the most in the team. And rather than me coming in and feeling threatened by them, because I knew that they had actually been offered to apply for my role prior to me taking the job, I saw them as someone that I could sort of confide in a little bit and bounce ideas off. And I thought we'd built quite a good rapport. So it did hurt me, and it sort of stunted me a little bit. I didn't take it personally as such, but what it did make me do was I became a little bit paranoid that others would follow. And so I'd already established the monthly test team meetings. And what I ended up doing was I tried to really emphasize the certain things that I knew for me helped me feel like I was working in a place that I wanted to stay. So that is where I had hammered home to the development manager the importance of investing in people, because nobody was getting one-to-ones on a regular basis. And I also made sure that we got assurances of either at least one training or conference a year, so that we were showing that we were actually investing not just time, but also something like financial. in people that they could develop themselves. And I was kind of saying, what is it about this job that you want? Like, do we need to create a career path for you? Do you need to visibly see what it is that shows that working here, you can fulfill your at least short-term career aspirations? Because I was so worried that I was going to be left with no one, and I was suddenly going to have to be an expert on a new product that I had never worked with before, all by myself. There's nothing worse than building on a foundation of lack of knowledge, like coming in and having to be the expert when you've got no one to bounce ideas off. Those conversations with the people, thankfully, nobody actually left during the time I was there.
You highlight another good point, which I was going to lead on to. Anyway, I think Simon made me think of it as well, is that I don't know, we're going down this route of people leaving, but there are other situations as well, and I'll go on to that in a second. Although we ourselves are disappointed by people leaving, it also has a knock-on effect on the rest of the group. And Chris, you made a good point there, is that it's how do we reassure those people, because some people react in different ways. They think that the whole world is going to fall apart, it's the start of something different, and there's a different scenario. So sometimes in the company where I work, they will shelve projects. People that have been working on a project for a very long time, they suddenly have nothing, and suddenly from a high you're suddenly brought back down to earth. How do we as leaders sort of help with the disappointment of others?
It's a good point, and it's sitting down, communicating, being open, being honest, being transparent, having frank conversations with the team. You know, okay, this is happening, but this is how we're going to move forward. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to improve. And as Chris said, with his examples of make the company focus more on its people, doing the regular meetings and the regular team bonding sessions and how that works. It is about building that team up again. It is about finding ways to get that team on the same page. Speaking from experience again, not just from as a leader, but twice in my career as a tester, the manager that I was working for, that I really respected and I valued and I loved working for them, they were let go as part of reorgs. And suddenly I've got an offshore manager rather than being onshore, sat beside me. As the lead at that point, I had to take on that responsibility of being the onshore person, dealing with the rest of the team being absolutely devastated that our boss that we all worked really closely with had been let go. And it is, again, it's trying to find ways through that by communication, by the metaphorical putting an arm around someone and encouraging them that, we're going to get through this together. We're in this together. We will find a way out of this. Our new boss won't be a dragon. It'll be fine. It's just we have to adapt the way we work and try and find ways to improve on what we are. But it comes down to the fact of, in that worst situation, it could still be worse. It's about looking at the opposite direction and looking at how we can improve it.
This does help us sort of segue away from people from moving on, talking about other disappointments, which, David, you brought up about people maybe having a bunch of work that's then taken away from them. Maybe there is a shift of focus of work. Maybe even you've had deadlines forced on you that are unrealistic, or you feel really let down by, or even you've been shifted teams, the work's carrying on, you don't get to see it through. These are all things that we've probably had to deal with. But how have we managed to make it through these things and still got a sanity to a level or not?
I think, again, Simon mentioned it, is communication. There are two things that you have to recognize with communication. The first is to be sympathetic, whether we're going through it to ourselves or whether we're supporting someone else through the disappointment, is being sympathetic to what they're going through. We've all gone through it. We've all been through similar situations. May not have exactly the same emotions as other people, but we have actually gone through it. And the second thing is also accepting. It's a bit like the whole COVID thing. There will be light at the end of the tunnel. Things will go back to some sort of more normality. There will be a new way of working. But, the short-term losses and the disappointments can, exactly as you said, lead on to bigger and better things, because it opens up new opportunities. Sometimes people get stuck in a rut and actually not then having the freedom to actually work on new projects and to be recognized for new skills is a brilliant thing to be given the opportunity for, rather than the disappointment of, I'm no longer needed on this project.
Sounds really easy, doesn't it, to sympathize with the people that are delivering the news, but it's not always the case that either you know who it is that's making the decisions, or that the person delivering the news is someone that you believe has shown the credibility or earned that sort of integrity sort of status as a leader, that you really feel like they care and therefore I can understand how they've gone. Like I've had people say this has been a really hard decision, but so and so and so, and you go, I don't know if I really think you have gone through those things. I'm finding it hard to relate to you and therefore sympathize with you having to give this news because you seem like a cold, heartless expletive. When I can sympathize with the person delivering me that news, I find it much easier for me to come around to it and find the positives and move forward than if either it's faithless or it's somebody that I cannot respect for whatever reason, be it implicit or explicit. We'll talk about those things in a future episode. It is hard. Like I've had news given to me by people that I don't even know. I have no idea where they come from, and they clearly couldn't give a damn about me. For me to then come to terms with accepting that by being given news by someone that it could have been like a faceless email or whatever, that was significantly harder for me to digest and to work through than it would have been if it can do it. So you're right, delivery is absolutely important and something that therefore has influenced me going forwards as someone that may have to be the deliverer of such news or to make decisions that I don't want to make, to ensure that when I do that, I take a lot of that processing, I consider who I'm delivering that news to, so much more to ensure that at the very least I'm a marked improvement on that which I have received.
Yeah.
The other thing is that sometimes also as leaders, we know more of the picture than we are able to give to the people we're actually giving the information to.
Hopefully, that's a different disappointment.
Yes. Sometimes we as leaders have to be very careful in how we and what language we use to give the right message, bearing in mind what we actually know, because we're protecting them from whatever information from above.
And there's consistency as well, isn't there? Because if you've always been quite a standoffish kind of person, and then all of a sudden you're trying to be like, oh, I know it's really hard for you, and trying to suddenly be like, oh, matey, that feels really false as well. You've got to be very, very consistent as a leader. I think that's where the credibility and thing comes in, isn't it?
Yeah, agreed.
And I think another thing is how you deliver disappointing news to other people. And I've always made sure, especially when we're in the office, that I always go to people's desks where I have the information. I remember that one of my bosses in a previous company would only ever come to my desk, or I'd only be summoned into their office if it was bad news. You immediately, as soon as you see their number on the call, can you come into my office? You think, oh no, so what are they going to give me now? I make sure that the people in my group don't ever have that feeling of dread, because they will always see me. I will always be talking to them. I won't always just be sending emails and then just be this face to give them bad news, because I don't think that's fair on the actual person.
No, agreed, and that's why it's good to invest in the one-to-one time and the team meetings and the more sociable, lighter meetings rather than it all being business process meetings. I totally agree on that, and again, it's similar experience for myself in that you have a boss that only ever comes to your desk when they've got something bad to tell you, or they only ever invite you for a meeting one-to-one when they want to read you the right act for something that's happened that they think is your fault. In fact, it wasn't. But as a leader, it is important that we are able to build those relationships so that when it comes to having to give bad news, because that is part of accepting as a leader, there will always be that chance that you will have to be the one that gives the bad news that, I don't know, half the team's being let go or something's changing and the project's being canned. It's part and parcel of having it, really. It's learning and building that skill up to be able to make that message clear and concise and with empathy, so that they don't think that you're the one that's almost putting them in the bad place. It's more a case of collectively we're having this discussion. I need to tell you this, but as you know, with me as a manager, I've always been there for you. I'm still going to be there for you. It's just that this situation is changing and we need to work through it. Because like you said, David, I've had a couple of the scenarios that I mentioned earlier about the managers leaving. One was that a visiting manager came over from India who was coming to meet our test manager at the time to work with her. And the next thing, he's asking where she is. She doesn't show up to the office. The next thing we get an email 3 hours later is she's gone. This person that's now visiting the office is your new manager. And no one knew it. And it's like, hang on a minute. What? We don't know this guy from Adam. We all loved working with the previous one. And she's just gone. And then another one was literally there was a decision they had to cut a test manager, and they cut the test manager that was a director level rather than the senior test manager, and he was the one we all worked for. And we all obviously started resenting the senior director that made the decision, but actually the manager that came in as his replacement was probably the best manager I ever worked for. In fact, he is the best manager I ever worked for. He's the one that gave me my chance in management. But that initial disappointment but my favourite people that I've always worked for, always looked up to, has been let go. How am I going to cope? I'm not sure I want to work here anymore. Can't talk to him because he's gone and he's not answering his phone to anybody. And you're like, well, what do we do? So you spend 2 days panicking because it happened on a Friday afternoon. So you spend all weekend stressing about it. You get in Monday morning, you first chat with your new boss, and it's like, oh, actually, yeah, I think this might work. But it's being able to almost self-regulate your emotions and get over that hump to be able to deal with it. Another example that I wanted to sort of flag for disappointment, and it's one that really riled me at the time, and my disappointment became so obvious that I had to take myself out of the office and walk around the car park for a little while, was in my previous role when I was really determined to try and help move things forward because I knew things were quite antiquated, but I didn't know how antiquated at this point. It was just one of my first projects I was on, and I just was talking to the PM, and the PM was like, right, we need an estimate for test effort. I'm like, that's fine. And I was like, so, okay, we're going to have one tester involved from the start and looking at the requirements and stuff. And they went, oh, no. Testers don't get involved at the start. Testers only get involved once the code's done. And I'm like, sorry, what? So how do we get the requirements? Oh, the requirements are signed off. You don't get anything to do with the requirements. They just come to you, signed off. Once the code's developed, you get the system at the end. And I was like, no, that's not how I understood this is going to work. And it was like, yeah, that's how it's worked. We haven't got the money to have testers on the project beforehand. So I'm sorry, you're going to have to deal with that. And it took me about 3 hours after that conversation to calm down. And the team all knew I was visibly annoyed. And I regret showing the team that, because I feel like that chinked away at my my ability to be the manager and protect the team from the issues, because I felt that it impacted me more than it should have done visibly. So I ended up taking myself out in the car park, or going to sit in the car and listening to a podcast or listening to something for half an hour before I went back into the office. And then I sort of calmed, and I started working out how I was going to talk to this PM about changing the process so that we could start to be involved earlier. And that's when I started building the whole culture of quality idea, because I needed allies that agreed with the idea of having testers earlier. So actually something good came out of that frustration, because I then started building this model of culture of quality, which we'll talk about in a future episode.
Oh, so many spoilers.
But it was probably the most disappointed I'd been, because obviously you get that imposter syndrome when you first join a new job, and you're starting to wonder whether, first week or so, where you start something new, you feel uneasy about everything, and then you realize it's maybe not quite what you were sold, and it's slightly different to the scenario, and then you're like, right, okay, it's not exactly what I was told it was, but you know what, it's a new job, it's a new start, I can make this work. And then you get into this project discussion and you have that, and you think, wow, what have I done? I've left something that I was well respected, well looked after, the team were great to work with, to this. And you forget all the other reasons why it might have happened.
That sort of thing is highlighted even more when you're working from home.
Yes.
And you're by yourself.
Yes.
Because the one thing I would like to highlight, Simon, when what you were talking about there, was actually, although you were trying to not show things to your team, you were trying to hide these things. Actually, I find it quite inspirational when a leader, a person that I report to, is passionately caring enough that they are riled about something. They've shown enough self-restraint to not lash out or do something that they're going to regret.
Punch the wall, yeah.
That is really important. And I think in these times that we're in now, we're in danger of losing that ability to see in other people those non-verbal things that are being communicated. It can be frustrations, it can be things we're excited about, it can be those little conversations that you have at the water cooler that we are actually missing. And while that's a little disappointment thing there, I thought what was quite interesting about what you were talking about there, you were talking about dealing with the disappointment of the flow of a project or a workflow to release not aligning with how things should be in the way that you see them. So that can be, we're bottlenecked into being rushed into do something. We even if you've highlighted all of those risks, imagine that you've done nothing wrong through the entire project. You've highlighted every risk at the right stage. You've managed to triage all the right bugs. You've got all the right bits into your definition of done, definition of ready. All of these great things have been put in place to mitigate that, and yet still you're having to push that release, and you know it's gonna be car crash, but it's still being forced upon you by people who seem to have ignored you. And I don't know how easy that is to come back from if I don't feel that I'm being respected for the information that I've put hours, days amount of work into. We've been, if I've put all this effort into to make sure that we're going to release something that I have so much confidence in, so much pride in releasing, and then the thing that's going to go out is nothing like that. And because I'm a tester, I'm aware that something that can be released from the outside doesn't look like it's not been tested very well. This was rushed. This isn't very good.
Yeah, and it's ironic as well because it's usually, even though you're pushing back and you're being forced into a corner to release something, when it does ultimately go wrong, first person they come pointing fingers at is the testers. It's a big disappointment to try and have to deal with that. And on that note, it's probably time to wrap this up. And I know it's disappointing to have to do that at this point. So hopefully we can deal with that disappointment. But that was a useful discussion. I enjoyed that. If anyone has any thoughts on disappointments they've had and how they've dealt with them, then feel free to reach out either at Testing Peers on Twitter or contact us at testingpeers.com, and we will read them, mention them if they're worth mentioning, or respond to you over the usual channels. So
we've got LinkedIn as well, Simon.
We have got LinkedIn. Search for Testing Peers on LinkedIn and follow us. I think we're up to 100 followers now on LinkedIn, so that's good. We're flying. Thank you again to our patrons, and thank you again to Saffron QA. Find out more about our sponsor in our show notes and on our website. With that, guys, thank you for the conversation. We look forward to speaking to you again in the near future. For now, it's goodbye from the Testing Peers.
Goodbye.